Hello, my name is Sharon Stewart. I'd like to read you a chapter of my book, Raven Quest. It begins with a raven myth. First raven was jealous of other birds. "You've given me no gifts," he croaked to Skya. "No sweet voice, no bright feathers." "Try your wings," said the maker, "and dance for my pleasure." Talk angled his wings against the wind, feeling its lift, letting it carry him toward the south ridge of Mount Storm. Though spring had come late, after a winter of deep snows, the rocky crest was already bare. The rays of the strengthening sun had heated it, creating a thermal of rising warm air. Talk soared, letting the currents carry him upward, higher and higher. Above him, he could see dozens of other ravens. He used his long sight, bringing the distant shapes into sharper focus. As he watched, two of them dipped their wings and rolled over and over in the air, diving down toward the trees before righting themselves with easy flaps of their wings and riding the thermal up again. Others followed them, and soon the air was full of ravens tumbling like black leaves against the bright blue sky. The sky dance. Catching the excitement, Talk bent his right wing and flipped onto his back for a moment. Then he did a barrel roll and powered into a falling leaf dive that dropped him steeply earthward. Wind sang through his flight feathers as he tumbled, croaking with delight. At last he pulled himself out of the dive, his flight muscles straining in his breast, and rose quickly, the blood pulsing in his head. Finding the thermal, he rode it up again. At the top, he saw Tarka, a young raven who had appeared at the roost the previous autumn. "Show off," she teased, as Talk came up level with her. At her far wingtip flew Grak, another newcomer. Ever since he had arrived, the big ravenet had pushed himself forward as the leader of the young ravens. All the other males had humbled themselves before him, except for Talk. Now Grak stared angrily at him, and Talk glared back. "Come on, you snail wings, let's dance," cried Tarka, twisting into a barrel roll that challenged them to follow. Talk copied her movement easily, coming out of his own roll level with Tarka's near wingtip. Grak, a bigger bird and heavier in the air, misjudged and came out some way below them. Tarka winked at Talk, with the white lids at the corners of her eyes. Then the two of them dove straight down, wings angled backward, with Grak trailing behind. Giddy with delight, they saw the ground rushing up at them. At the last possible moment, they pulled out of the power dive. Then, with lazy wing flaps, they found the thermal. As they rode it back up, Grak edged nearer to Talk and gave him a savage blow with his wing. With a mocking "quark," Talk rolled onto his back and flew upside down, waving his claws in pretended helplessness, leveling out again just beyond Grak's reach. Grak shot him a glance of pure hatred. "Fancy dancing, clown, but it takes more than that to make a raven lord," he croaked. "Bravest to the carcass, strongest against your enemies, that's what wins a lady and a territory." "Big boast, Grak," jeered Tarka, who had caught up with them again. "You haven't won anything yet." "But I'm Grak, son of Barak, lord of wide lands," Grak snapped. "I have something to boast about. Not like this no-name. He has no lineage. Why, he's no better than a common crow." A crow! It was a deadly insult to compare a raven to one of those clumsy flappers. In fury, Tok launched himself at Grak, giving him a sharp blow with his claws, then doing an insolent loop over his back. "You should know. A crow must have taught you to fly, numbwing," he taunted. But anger spoiled the joy of flight for him. Even in the air, his lack of a proper name followed him, and there was nothing he could do about it. Nothing. Tilting his wings, he banked away from the other two, arrowing downward toward the forest below. "Oh, for Skaya's sake," Tarka called after him, "do you have to be so touchy?" Tok paid no heed. How could she understand how he felt? She had an honorable name. In another year or two, she would command a mate and a fine territory. But an outcast like him had no future. In the air, he was more than a match for any other ravenet. But on the feeding ground, at the roost, he was nobody. Tok no name, the others called him, when they thought to call him anything at all. He landed on a limb of a large maple tree, still leafless after the long winter. Despite his rage, he was ever hungry, and he scanned the floor of the forest, the fine hair-like feathers over his nostrils quivering. At first he saw nothing, then the tiniest movement. At the foot of the tree, a careless deer mouse popped out of its snow tunnel, half collapsed now by the thaw. On silent wings, Tok dropped down and seized it, crushing it in his powerful beak. Though his hunger was fierce, a sudden thought kept him from bolting down the food. His mother, Lady Grow, had ignored him and driven him away when he tried to find out more about his father. But now it was the moon of nestlings, and food would always be welcome. Lifting himself low over the treetops, he headed for the cliff where Lord and Lady Grow had built this season's nest. His mother had chosen a different site from the place where Tok had been raised. Were her memories as bad as his? He wondered this, remembering the bitter cold of that time, the gnawing hunger in his unfilled belly, and the shriveled bodies of his brother and sister lying in the bottom of the nest. Smaller and weaker than Tok, they had been unable to survive such hardship. Even his mother had come close to starving when the food supply failed long before snowmelt. He could dimly remember his father, fasted to a shadow of himself, winging in with small mouthfuls of food. And then he came no more. Not long afterward, his mother had returned to the nest, her crop bulging with food. It had the rank flavor of old carrion when she stuffed it down Tok's throat, but he gulped it eagerly. He soon found out where the food came from, for a big male raven named Grow appeared at the nest. He stared at Tok with cold eyes, begrudging every morsel of food Tok's mother shared with him. Frightened of he knew not what, Tok had left the nest as soon as he could fly. After that he flapped awkwardly after his mother, Lady Grow now, trying to learn as best he could how to find food for himself. All too soon she lost interest in him and spent her time foraging and soaring with her new mate. Both adults drove Tok off when he tried to follow them, and so he was left alone. At first it was not too bad, for it was the way of young ravens to become independent as soon as they could. Tok had banded with other youngsters of his year, foraging in groups wherever they could sneak into the territories of the lords and ladies, roosting together at night for comfort. But soon rumors spread within the roost, and his companions began to shun him, because when they challenged him he had no lineage, no father's name to give them. His mother had refused to tell him, nor would anyone else. And so Tok had come to understand that his father had shamed him somehow. When the other young birds dispersed at the end of the summer, flying boldly away to seek new homes and future mates, he had not followed them, though his wings ached too. But how could he go, he asked himself, with no lineage to offer a mate? He would never be able to hold a territory. He would remain an outsider wherever he went. His only hope was that his mother would change her mind and grant him his father's name. So he had stayed where he was, stealing a living as best he could on the fringes of the lords and ladies' territories. In the moon of the falling leaves, young birds who had dispersed from distant Ravenlands began to arrive. For a while he was caught up in the excitement of their fall flights, practicing his skill in the air and rejoicing in it. He joined the bold groups that invaded the feeding grounds, defying the lords and ladies by their sheer numbers and demanding their share of the food. Then came the moon of the hunters, the only time the two-legs ventured far into the forest. Most of them took only a little meat from the moose and deer they killed, so the forest was rich in skinned carcasses, prime pickings for ravens. Tok feasted along with the others. In the evening roosts he listened eagerly to the adventures of the young strangers, especially the dashing Tarka. For a time he was allowed to be one of them, for the newcomers knew nothing of his past and accepted him as just another stranger like themselves. But then, as winter closed in, solitary adult birds from the near territories began to roost with the young newcomers. They all knew about Tok's father, and they told the story to the newcomers. When Tok shuffled closer in the roost, trying to hear for himself, everyone would fall silent and stare at him. So once again he was Tok, no name. And now some called him Tok, stay-at-home, too. Grak in particular liked to taunt him. A dominant bird, he swaggered about the feeding grounds with bristling feathers, yielding to no one but the lords and ladies. At night in the roost, Tok often heard him boasting about his strength and his family to the others. He also had plenty to say about shame and outcasts and ravenettes too cowardly to seek new homes. There were always murmurs and whispers of agreements, and the birds who roosted closest to Tok would move a little bit further off along the branches. So in the end, he was lonelier than ever. Of course, he never let the others know how he felt. When they snubbed him, he pretended to ignore them. He met every taunt with a jeer, every push with a shove. And in the air, he danced circles around them. It was all he could do to show he was Cora, despite his lack of a name. Carrying the mouse in his beak, Tok now approached Lord and Lady Grow's nest. Grow hated him, he knew, and would drive him away on sight. So he landed first in a tree some distance away. But for once his luck was good, and he could see that his mother was alone. She was standing in the nest with half-open wings, shading her 4 downy nestlings from the full rays of the sun. Kara, Lady Grow, was a big bird, and she was a beauty. Her black feathers shone in the sunlight with iridescent color, green on her cheeks and underparts, with shades of blue and violet on her back and wings and wedge-shaped tail. Tok ventured closer, landing on a dead tree stump beside the nest. "It's you," Lady Grow stared at him out of cold amber eyes. "Why are you still around to shame me? You have no more Cora than your father. You should have left with your yearmates. If Grow finds you here, he'll kill you." But she leaned over and snatched the mouse Tok had offered, all the same. Tearing strips off it, she pulped them in her beak, then crammed the meat down the gaping throats of her nestlings. The last bit of skin she swallowed herself. When she finished, she stropped her beak on the twigs of her nest. Then she roused her feathers so they stood out stiffly around her body, making her look twice her real size. "Go away," she ordered. "Leave this land as you should have done last year." "Then grant me my father's name," begged Talk. "How can I go without that?" Lady Grow hissed in annoyance. "The court declared your father Ancora. He let us starve, remember? You nearly died, like the others." Condemned by the court. It was even worse than Talk had thought, for the court was the source of Raven law. Its dooms were final, fatal. "But maybe he just couldn't find food," he quavered. Lady Grow cut him off. "Your father betrayed us," she snapped. "He died for that, and his name died with him. We ravens do not speak the names of the dishonored, those who die on Cora. No raven lines must ever bear their names. That is your misfortune." "But, Mother," Talk began. Then suddenly a great buffet sent him reeling from his perch. Before he could regain his balance, he was struck again and then again. He flapped awkwardly into a spruce tree far below the nest and faced his attacker, who settled on a branch above. It was Lord Grow. He roused, shaking his feathers, and stared down at Talk menacingly. "What do you mean by sneaking around my nest, meddling with my family?" he growled. "I only brought my mother some food," protested Talk, "for the nestlings." "Bah!" Grow fanned his huge wings. "We need no help from the likes of you, outcast. Off with you before I kill you, as I did your no-good father." Talk shuddered. It was true, then, what he had half guessed but feared to believe. "Murderer!" he croaked. Grow dove at him, slashing with his beak, driving him from the branch. They rocketed out of the trees, the larger bird right on Talk's tail, as he dodged wildly this way and that. But Talk's nimble wings saved him, and Grow began to fall behind. "Next time I'll leave you for carrion," the older bird cried. With a sweep of his powerful wings, he wheeled and flew back in the direction of the nest. Talk flew until he could fly no more. Then he plunged into a dense copse of fir trees. Heart pounding, he peered out, scarcely able to believe Grow was not still right behind him. Grow, his father's murderer. He shivered. His mother had accepted Grow soon after her mate's disappearance, granting him the territory and the lordship. She must have known that Talk's father would never return. Had she and Grow planned his father's death then? In misery, Talk buried his head under his wing. Thank you for listening. If you want to know more, you'll just have to read the book. Bye for now.